The Godfather is one of the most iconic films of all time. It's been parodied and referenced to no end since its release, and currently holds the number 2 spot on the IMDb Top 250 list. Critically and commercially, it's been incredibly successful. Almost everyone involved in its production is practically a household name, and it wouldn't be a stretch to say it changed the film industry as a whole. Yet somehow, I've never seen it. Not only have I never seen it, I know next to nothing about it, so I thought it'd be interesting to give it a watch in 2025. 53 years after its release, and see if it's held up. And because of this fresh perspective, I hope I can bring something new to the discussion. Sometimes when a film garners a legacy as strong as The Godfather's, it begins to survive on legacy alone. People can no longer look at it objectively, and the story can become overrated. Is that the case here, or is The Godfather every bit as legendary as it was in 1972? Before we find the answer to that question, it's best that we take a look at the story behind its production in order to fully understand the context in which it was made. Due to the movie's popularity, the production history is well documented, which is good because the story behind this film's development is genuinely insane. The Godfather is based on a novel of the same name, written by Mario Puzo. Paramount purchased the rights to produce a film adaptation for only $80,000. Allegedly, the only reason Puzo accepted such a deal was because he urgently needed $10,000 to get out of his gambling debts. The novel would go on to stay on the New York Times bestseller list for 67 weeks and sell over 9 million copies in 2 years. So it goes without saying that Puzo could have potentially gotten much more. Either way though, Paramount now had the rights, and pre-production began on The Godfather. With that, the time came for the studio to select a director. Immediately, they knew that the director had to be of Italian-American heritage, and this makes sense. Cultural or familial pride is a theme that is very important to this narrative, and could only properly be related by someone who can sympathize with that perspective. After considering multiple options, Francis Ford Coppola was asked to direct the film. Initially though, he turned it down. He was unimpressed with the source material, and he already owned his own studio, American Zoetrope. However, after George Lucas' debut film THX 1138 flopped at the box office, Coppola wasn't in a great financial situation, and decided to accept Paramount's proposal. THX 1138 wasn't the only reason Coppola accepted the job, but it is interesting to consider that if THX had been a success, Coppola may never have come to direct the greatest films of his career. Eventually, Puzo was also hired by Paramount to produce a screenplay for the film. Coppola and Puzo both wrote separate screenplays while staying in contact to compare notes. They did 3 drafts before filming began, with the final draft being 163 pages long, far longer than a typical screenplay. That being said though, scenes were still being written and added during filming. While I'm unsure what filming practices were like at the time, this seems to be common nowadays. Infamously, a lot of MCU movies often don't have completed scripts by the time filming begins. Obviously, those are less reliant on an airtight script than a character-driven drama like The Godfather though, which makes The Godfather even more impressive in my eyes. Coppola was initially given a budget of only $2.5 million, but after the book began to grow in popularity, he argued for a higher budget, eventually landing somewhere in the $6 to $7 million range. Another debate Coppola had with the higher-ups at Paramount concerned the filming locations. Paramount wanted him to film in Kansas City in order to cut down on cost. Coppola insisted that it was shot on location in New York and Sicily though, and this was definitely for the best, particularly for the sections of the story set in Sicily. The beautiful landscapes of the Sicilian countryside contrast beautifully with the streets of New York City or the interior of the Corleone compound. Naturally, all this jawing with Paramount did eventually land Coppola in some trouble. He felt as though he could be fired at any time. To combat this, he would fire members of the crew as preemptory strikes to delay his own firing. For example, he fired the editor and assistant director. Coppola went on to say that he felt like the Godfather on set, firing people who were angling to have him fired. Coppola didn't just find trouble with Paramount though, as many within actual Italian crime families took issue with the film's production. At one point, producer Al Ruddy's car had been shot at with a note being left in the dashboard, which essentially read, "Shut down the movie or else." A compromise was eventually made, however. They agreed to allow the production to continue so long as the word mafia was never said in the film, along with various other rules. To enforce these rules, there were mobsters present on set, one of which was a man named Lenny Montana. Lenny was a former wrestler who was 6 foot 6 inches tall and weighed in at about 320 pounds at the time. He was working as an enforcer for the Colombo family when he was approached by Coppola to play a part in the film. He was eventually cast as an enforcer for the Corleone family named Luca Brasi. Within the film, there's a scene where Luca practices his speech to the Godfather and then fumbles over said speech. This was inspired by events that actually occurred on set. Having no experience in acting previously, Lenny was obviously nervous, which wasn't helped by the fact that he appeared opposite Marlon Brando. Speaking of the casting choices though, this sparked a whole new series of debates between Coppola and Paramount. Coppola and Puzo wanted Marlon Brando to play the role of the Godfather, but the studio disagreed, citing his short temper and him being difficult to work with. Eventually, after seeing the effort Brando put into his audition, the studio acquiesced and gave Brando the part. Several other major characters like Tom Hagen, Kay Adams, and Johnny Fontane had already been cast, but the protagonist, Michael Corleone, still wasn't. Many were considered for the role, including Jack Nicholson, Martin Sheen, and James Caan, who was eventually cast as Sonny. Coppola's choice for Michael was Al Pacino, much to the dismay of the studio executives. Coppola wanted Pacino because he was relatively unknown at the time, and also an Italian-American. For the most part, everyone does a great job in their roles. Marlon Brando and Al Pacino steal the show, and James Caan's performance as Sonny is very underrated in my eyes. Sonny is a character that wears his heart on his sleeve, which required a very spirited performance on Caan's part, and he absolutely delivered. One moment in particular that I love is when Sonny finds out that Carlo hit Connie. This moment is extremely important to the story, and Caan's reaction really sells the emotional weight here. Once the cast was figured out, filming began. The cinematographer for the film was Gordon Willis, also known as the Prince of Darkness. He earned this name due to his creative use of shadows and underexposure. Most of the film is also shot at eye level with the characters. This makes the audience feel as though we are in these scenes, observing these moments firsthand. The only parts of the story that break these conventions are when we aren't in New York, specifically the section taking place in Sicily. We get a few wider shots of the countryside, and the exposure is actually turned up for these sections. As was previously mentioned, this creates a major contrast to the rest of the narrative, which we'll discuss later. Finally, filming ended on August 7th, 1971. All that was left now was post-production, which mostly focused on cutting the film down to a manageable length. Still, it ended up being close to 3 hours long. This wasn't a problem for audiences though, as the film was very well received upon release, both critically and financially. The Godfather became the highest grossing film of 1972 and was nominated for 11 Academy Awards, winning 3. The Godfather was the definition of a blockbuster and is recognized as one of the greatest and most influential movies of all time. With the production history out of the way, let's get started with the film itself.
I believe in America.
During my initial viewing, I actually had to pause the movie after hearing this line. Why? Well, I'm a big fan of superheroes. One of my favorite comic book stories of all time is Batman: The Long Halloween. If you're not familiar with it, Nolan's The Dark Knight took heavy inspiration from Long Halloween. Why do I bring this up? Well, the very first line in Long Halloween is Bruce Wayne saying, "I believe in Gotham." I had heard the comic was inspired by The Godfather, but I had no idea the connections ran this deep. This immediately made me realize the weight of this film, that it has influences so deep that it casually permeates through various forms of media. This cemented its legacy in my own head, and for me personally, ensured that the film held my attention for the following 3 hours. At its core, this narrative centers around the rise, or fall depending on your perspective, of Michael Corleone. While The Godfather takes place in a similar world to the one you and I live in, it still takes quite a bit of time to establish its setting and characters, and this makes sense. While we inhabit the same planet Earth, this criminal underworld is not something a majority of us are going to be familiar with. We may assume we know a thing or two about it, but one aspect the film wants to establish to the audience is the moral ambiguity of it all. Our natural inclination is that these are criminals. What they're doing is wrong, and so they deserve any bad that happens throughout the course of the narrative as retribution for their actions. Even our protagonist holds a similar position at the start of the film. While he doesn't feel as strongly as that, and doesn't want anything bad to happen to his family, he also wants no part in their business. Through this opening sequence though, this family is humanized. In fact, let's go back to the opening scene. This moral ambiguity is established before we even leave this room. We hear a tragic story of how this man's daughter was brutally beaten by 2 young boys. He went to the police and the boys were sentenced to 3 years in prison. However, the sentence was suspended. Now this man Bonacera wants justice from the Godfather. The justice he wants though is for the 2 boys to be killed for their crime. Vito mentions how his daughter is still alive, so taking their lives wouldn't be justice. It would just make Vito a murderer. Instead, he sends someone to make them suffer like Bonacera's daughter suffers. Naturally, we understand Bonacera's position. This is a tragedy, and the law failed in this case. The Godfather is supplying the justice the system can't. Our view of Vito and the Corleone family as a whole changes, and we grow to have a certain level of respect for him. That's the purpose this scene serves for the audience, but it also serves a secondary purpose. Vito agrees to help Bonacera for free since it's his daughter's wedding day. All Vito asks in return is for a favor sometime in the future. This plot thread is addressed when Sonny dies. While this isn't essential to the plot, it serves as a good bit of world building. This scene is also just incredible to look at. It begins with a 3-minute long shot that slowly zooms out from Bonacera's face, eventually settling just behind Vito's shoulder. This This makes Bonacera's story all the more impactful as we feel as though he's talking directly to us. Meanwhile, it builds anticipation and mystery for the reveal of the Godfather himself, a reveal that is well worth it. Vito Corleone was played by Marlon Brando, who was only 47 at the time. They meticulously applied makeup to age him up, and it honestly looks great. If I didn't know what Marlon Brando looked like already, I honestly wouldn't doubt his appearance. Back to the opening in particular though, the whole scene is intensely underexposed, and this serves to exaggerate the events taking place here. It's quite literally a shady deal, one made in the dark. Suddenly though, we're dragged away from this room and brought to the events taking place just outside. It's Connie Corleone's wedding day. This scene is overexposed, loud, and cheerful, contrasting beautifully with the Corleone business. It serves to humanize the Corleone family and also familiarize us with the major characters. Usually when a film is just about 3 hours long, there's bound to be a little wasted time, scenes that perhaps should have been left on the cutting room floor. I can't say that's the case here though. Every scene, especially in the early parts of the story, serve multiple purposes. Like I said, this scene establishes the dichotomy of the Corleone family and familiarizes us with the characters. But the setting is also very important, as Connie's marriage is absolutely pivotal in this narrative. In fact, her marriage bookends the film, with the ending coinciding with the end of her marriage. Another thing this wedding sequence does though, is establish Michael Corleone's distance from his family. He arrives late, sits apart from them, and has no desire to share in the family business. We'll get to that later though. This wedding sequence is the prime example in my eyes of why it was so important for the director to be an Italian American. The whole sequence comes across as very candid. We don't feel as much like we're watching a movie, and more so like we're attending this very wedding. And someone who's never been to a big Italian wedding simply could not recreate that feeling.
Hey, Polly! I got 2 gabagool! Gabagool!
Ah, and a prosciutto, you stupid jerk!
As the sequence continues, even more is set up, like Enzo,
The baker!
and Johnny Fontaine. And through Johnny Fontaine's plotline, we get to see the Corleone family in action. Kay, Michael's girlfriend, asking questions about Johnny also gives us more information on how the Corleone family operates. Finally, 34 minutes in, this world is established and we move on to the main conflict. A man named Sollozzo approaches the Corleone family with a business proposal. He wants them to finance his enterprise and enter the narcotics game. Sollozzo needs Corleone, one for the money, but also because Vito has political connections and can offer protection from the police. To everyone's surprise though, Vito turns down the proposal. While he's doing so, Sonny speaks up and expresses interest in the deal. Little did he know though, this would seal his father's fate.
Michael, where you been?
Is he all right?
We don't know yet. There's all kinds of stories. It was hit bad, Mikey.
If Vito dies, Sonny would be made the new Don. Sollozzo knows Vito wanted to accept his offer. All he had to do was get Vito out of the picture. After hearing the news about Vito, Michael immediately returns home. While the Corleone family discusses their next move, it's clear that Michael still wants nothing to do with the family business. He's only there for his father. As he talks to Kay in the following scenes though, it's clear that he is growing apart from her. However, this isn't cemented until Michael goes to visit his father in the hospital. And the following sequence is one of my favorites in the film. Michael finds the hospital empty, with all the Corleone's personnel missing from the premises. Apparently, they were sent away 10 minutes before he arrived because they were interfering with hospital operations. Michael immediately understands what this means. Without hesitation, he moves his father to another room and stands guard. This is when Enzo,
The baker!
arrives. Michael then creates a plan to protect his father. Before executing it though, he plainly tells his father that he's with him now. Michael is now taking an active part in his family's business, even if it is just to protect his father. Michael and Enzo stand in the front of the hospital and scare off the would-be assassins. Afterward, Enzo is shaking so badly he can't even light a cigarette, but Michael's hands are still. He's coming to the same realization that we are as an audience. Not only does he now have an active part in this, but he seems to be made for it. One thing I hadn't noticed until I watched Thomas Flight's video on this scene is how good the editing is. The shot of the lighter is held just a few frames longer than normal, and this draws our attention to it subconsciously. We recognize just how important this moment is. The second Michael realizes that his hands aren't trembling at all, a switch is flipped. He gains the confidence to do what needs to be done, if not for the family, at least for his father. And that part is important to note. Michael's transformation throughout the film was a slow one. At this point, he still has no intention of actually joining the family business. But right now his family needs him, and it's a matter of life or death. Sollozzo wants to meet with Michael in order to renegotiate with the Corleones. Michael feels they need to take out Sollozzo, or else the attempts on his father's life won't stop. The problem is that Sollozzo is being guarded by the police captain. Still, Michael wants to take his shot at them both during these negotiations. As Michael discusses his plan, there's a slow zoom in as he sits still in his chair. It grabs the audience's attention, and what Michael's saying is shocking both to the audience and his family. The plan is put in motion. The Corleones have a last supper of sorts, eating Chinese food before Michael's sacrifice. It's also interesting how someone at this table would later go on to betray the family as well, further drawing on his connection to the Last Supper. Finally, the time arrives though for Michael to be brought to the meeting, and this is yet another scene I absolutely love. The plan is for Michael to grab the gun from behind the toilet and immediately shoot them both as he exits the bathroom. But that's not what happens. The scene grows loud as Michael exits the bathroom, but instead of coming out firing, he calmly sits back down. For a second, we as an audience consider that he may have suddenly backed out, lost his nerve perhaps. Maybe he wasn't who we thought he was. Maybe he wasn't made for this. Just as we're considering this though, the scene grows loud once again, and suddenly Michael fires on Sollozzo and the police captain, killing them both. Al Pacino's performance simply cannot be understated here. He does an incredible job selling the anxiety and anger of Michael. Even as he exits the restaurant, the panicked walk, even down to the way he drops the gun, all seem believable. The music swells this moment, emphasizing its importance in both the narrative and Michael's life, as he now needs to go into hiding in Sicily. Following this is a montage of how the Corleones spun this story and the aftermath of the event. Fun fact, this montage was edited by George Lucas, and the man playing the piano is actually Francis Ford Coppola's father, Carmine Coppola, who also did some of the work on the soundtrack for the film. Speaking of the soundtrack, it does an excellent job all throughout of enhancing the atmosphere and setting, whether that setting be the Corleone compound, an abandoned hospital, or the Sicilian countryside. With Sollozzo and the police captain dead, it seems as though Michael's job is finished. His father is safe and eventually returns back home. While the Corleones are locked in a bitter war with the other families, that isn't Michael's problem anymore. While in Sicily, Michael finds a wife for himself and seems to be rebuilding his life. This section of the story is bright, colorful, and peaceful. We as an audience begin to feel genuine hope for Michael's new life. While that's going on, we find out that Connie's husband, Carlo, has been hitting her. I previously mentioned how I love Con's performance, but it bears repeating. The sequence also ties back into the theme of moral ambiguity that is present in the film. Sonny is a good brother and isn't going to let Carlo get away with this. At the same time though, Sonny isn't such a great husband himself. In fact, in the scene just before this, he's having an affair. You can't exactly root for these characters, we're more so passive observers. And as was previously mentioned, the movie is filmed with this thought in mind. It's all shot eye level to make us feel like we're observing these characters candidly. And the scene where Sonny beats up Carlo is an excellent example of this. He beats him up in the middle of the street in broad daylight. The camera seems slightly lower than usual, not quite at eye level, and far out of harm's way. Almost as if we're seeing this through the perspective of one of the kids playing on the street. Unfortunately, this event leads to the death of Sonny though. Sonny finds out that Carlo hit Connie again and rushes over to stop him. As it turns out, it was a trap however, and Sonny is ambushed at a toll booth. And this ended up being the most expensive shot in the film. My favorite detail from this moment is the billboard in the background. It was actually put there in order to cover a skyscraper off in the horizon. While The Godfather was made in 1972, this scene actually takes place sometime in the 1940s, so that skyscraper wouldn't have existed then, which is why it had to be covered. All in all, this scene took 3 days to film and ended up costing about $100,000. Because of its importance in the story though, I would say it's well worth it. After hearing of Sonny's death, Vito immediately calls a meeting to restore peace between the families, and also to ensure that Michael can return to America safely. Before the meeting is held, however, Michael's wife is killed by a car bomb intended for him. Despite enjoying peace for a time, Michael is reminded that he can't escape from his fate. And this is the biggest tragedy in the film in my eyes, as a completely innocent woman was dragged into the family business. It makes it clear to Michael that running isn't an option anymore. When it comes to the family business, he's either in or out. He can no longer sit in this middle ground. So he goes back to America and takes his seat at the head of the table. Still though, Michael's transformation isn't complete. Some time passes and Michael marries Kay and the two have a child together. Meanwhile, Vito grows older and eventually passes away. Seeing this as an opportunity, the other families make a move to assassinate Michael. Before this happens though, Michael has to attend his nephew's baptism, and the following sequence is one of the most incredible I have ever seen. The editing, dialogue, cinematography, and music all come together to create one of the most powerful moments in any narrative. As the baby is baptized, Michael makes moves to get rid of all his family's enemies. One by one they are assassinated as Michael denounces sin and becomes the Godfather. And this sequence makes evident one of Michael's newer traits. He is dishonest to his very core. He denounces sin while having men murdered. He promises to let Carlo go, only to have him strangled moments later, and in the final seconds of the film, he plainly tells Kay that he didn't have Carlo murdered. Whether it can be said that this is the tale of the rise or fall of Michael Corleone depends on your perspective, but one thing is certain. He is not the same man we were introduced to a couple hours earlier. He has completed his transformation. The Godfather is an origin story and a crime drama of epic proportions. It not only lived up to my expectations, but it surpassed them. As stupid as it is, one of the first things I had ever seen about The Godfather was this scene from Family Guy.
It insists upon itself, Lois.
Many will immediately dismiss this complaint and say that it doesn't actually mean anything, but I actually tend to agree with it for some films. The Godfather is not one of them, though. The Godfather does take its time to get going, and it also seems to assume that the audience cares quite a bit about what's going on, and this is where many find fault. However, I think this approach works very well for this narrative. For the sake of comparison, let's use the Fast and Furious franchise as an example. Those are films with very little, if any, meat on their bones. What you see is what you get. So what you see has to dazzle the audience. It has to completely blow the audience away every single moment without fail. This isn't wrong for these movies. They're made to simply entertain and nothing else. Fast and loud is the name of the game. But in that style of filmmaking comes a certain level of insecurity. The filmmakers constantly have to worry about holding the audience's attention. The Godfather doesn't really concern itself with that. The movie is made in such a way that it almost seems to not care that you're watching it. Think back to the style of cinematography here. We're simple observers. The story plays out not in the way that is most visually interesting for the audience, but in the way that is most natural, which is what makes it so appealing. Its content isn't romanticized or made more palatable. Instead, it's real, it's raw, and it's dark. There's a level of confidence to the cinematography that can only be found in older films, and I absolutely love it. Needless to say, The Godfather surpassed my expectations, and I'm very excited to continue with this series. In between this film and Part 2 on the IMDb Top 250 list is The Dark Knight, but seeing as that's a Nolan film, I'll instead cover it whenever I get to it in the Nolan Marathon. So next up, we'll be jumping straight into The Godfather Part 2. If that seems like something you'd be interested in, let me know in the comments and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching.